Okay, we've seen what we might call a set of objectivist accounts of beauty. Let's focus on the movement towards subjectivity in beauty in the 18th century, toward the idea that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, as it's put in the cliche. In fact, the discipline of aesthetics is often said to have begun in the 18th century and is often attributed to the third Earl of Shaftesbury as an invention. But let's focus primarily on Hume and Kant in their classic discussions of these matters. All right, here's Hume from his great essay, Of the Standard of Taste. Beauty is such an order and construction of parts as, either by the primary constitution of our nature, by custom, or by caprice, is fitted to give a pleasure and satisfaction to the soul. Pleasure and pain, therefore, are not only necessary attendants of beauty and deformity, but constitute their very essence. Beauty is no quality of things themselves. It exists merely in the mind which contemplates them, and each mind perceives a different beauty. Now, one thing we notice here is the association of beauty with pleasure. And one question we might put to aestheticians who associate or identify, as Hume appears to in that passage, beauty with pleasure, is why it is that not all pleasures are responses to the beautiful. That is, what is it that distinguishes pleasures with regard to beauty from other sorts of pleasures? And Shaftesbury's answer, which became Kant's answer, was that the pleasure with regard to beauty is disinterested. Now, Hume and Kant need to take the sting out of their initial subjectification of beauty, because we do argue about whether things are beautiful, and we can become more attentive to things that we didn't previously regard as beautiful. We can help others become more attentive to things they didn't regard as beautiful. And also we can maybe lose our appreciation of beauty for things, and so on. So with regard to some, first of all, differentiating pleasure as a response to the beautiful from other sorts of pleasures, and then second, by accounting for our social practices with regard to beauty, we have to make a move after we subjectify beauty, we might say. Okay, Hume's move is toward intersubjectivity, and what he does is he tries to develop what he calls a standard of taste, and this is the consensus of sensitive, well-educated, and widely experienced critics. So, so there's the moment where you go totally subjective about beauty, and then there's the moment where you go intersubjective and say the standard is a social standard, and that's as good as we're going to do. The standard is the subjectivity of the correct viewers, the good critic. In Kant, the idea is that, again, he develops this theme from Shaftesbury of disinterestedness, and he actually says that with regard to beautiful objects, we take a pleasure that is indifferent to the existence of the object. So, for example, if you're lusting after someone, or if you want to buy something, you're not indifferent to the existence of the object. The pleasure that you take in obtaining the object depends on the existence of the object. It engages your interests. But for Kant, a real response to the beauty of an object is a response to the pure form of that object. It's a disinterested pleasure. And, objects in which we take a disinterested pleasure are beautiful objects. So again, it takes some of the sting out of this idea of subjectivity. Now, furthermore, because our pleasure in the beautiful is disinterested, it is, for Kant, universalized. It's part of the content of a judgment of beauty that I at the same time I make that judgment, I judge also that all other people will find this beautiful, because nothing particular in me is engaged in the experience of beauty, because it's disinterested and it's indifferent to the existence of the object. So I must judge that all other people will also find this thing beautiful, although the judgment of beauty is entirely subjective, and I'm well aware that other people may disagree. Now, this appears to be contradictory, and you know, I'm not sure it helps that much, actually, although the critique of judgment is certainly probably the greatest classic of aesthetics in some ways, as it wrestles with these questions. One other figure we might mention who associates beauty with pleasure, which again is a move in this subjective development, is George Santayana in his great classic, The Sense of Beauty, written in the late 19th century. And Santayana defines beauty as objectified pleasure. I take my subjective state, my subjective pleasure, as a property of the object. That is, I attribute the pleasure to the object and not to myself. Now, there's a lot of detail to be worked out about this. It's not perhaps as implausible as it sounds, but it does seem to rest the idea of beauty on some kind of weird mistake where I'm attributing subjectivity to objects that at least don't necessarily have that kind of subjectivity, like sunsets or whatever. Now, it seems to me that this move toward a pure subjectivism and this association of beauty with pleasure account for the end of beauty as a theme in philosophy and as a theme in art. The 20th century in art largely ignored beauty as a value, whereas it was certainly central in the couple of centuries before that, or several centuries before that, at least. And I'll do a last talk on why I think beauty has declined as a value, on political grounds, and also because I think the subjectivism is a dead end and leaves you with nothing at the end to say, because, well, I like it, and that's about all you can say, although, of course, these guys keep talking. So that'll be the last bit. All right, let me actually just do a little addendum to that, about why this idea of beauty as pleasure and the total subjectivity of beauty is a dead end. Now, first of all, if beauty is merely a matter of pleasure, then I think it's fairly frivolous, and furthermore, it's difficult to distinguish it from any other pleasure, as we've seen, I think. And also, once beauty becomes a totally subjective quality, the term beauty has no meaning whatsoever. It means whatever the hell anybody wants it to mean. You see, at the point where beauty becomes a completely subjective quality, and Hume and Kant acknowledge that it is, as their first move. I mean, in philosophy, as J.L. Austin said, there's the bit where you say it, and then there's the bit where you take it back. And they take back the total subjectivity of beauty after acknowledging it, as well they should, because if it means whatever anybody wants it to mean, if it applies to any object that anybody wants to apply it to, it's not different. It's not a concept. In fact, it's nothing at all, and it's a philosophical dead end, among other things. And we're going to talk about why it's, in some ways, also taken as a political dead end, and talk about the disillusionment about beauty in the 20th century.